to join this panel today to speak about the deeply concerning developments with regard to press freedom in Kashmir, which has been marked by the arrests of 3 journalists under the draconian Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act this year alone. I would like to begin by providing a background of what the press freedom situation has looked like in Kashmir in recent years. Reporting in Kashmir has never been easy, but it has become immensely more difficult under the BJP-led government. In 2017, the government began targeting journalists under the Anti-Terror Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, India's draconian anti-terror law, which has extremely harsh bail provisions. CPJ's 2021 annual prison census found that India actually set a country record for the greatest number of detained journalists in India and Jammu and Kashmir since at least 1992, when the organization began its annual prison census. Our census found that 5 out of 7 detained journalists in India and Jammu and Kashmir as of December 1st, 2021, have been accused of or charged under the UAPA. At 22 years old, Cameron Yusuf was the first Kashmiri journalist to be detained under this law. In March 2022, last month, a court discharged him of a terror funding allegation because the authorities failed to prove any of the allegations against him, and he should have never been detained in the first place. In April 2020, police opened up a UAPA investigation into female photojournalist Masud Zahra for a photograph that she captured for the New Humanitarian for an article on Kashmir's mental health crisis. In Kashmir, a photograph is now considered a terrorist offense. Meanwhile, impunity against violence against Kashmiri journalists has continued with absolute impunity. In June 2018, Sujat Bukhari, the prominent founder and editor of the English newspaper Rising Kashmir, was shot dead in Srinagar. This killing remains unsolved as of today. The BJP-led government's unilateral revocation of Jammu and Kashmir's special autonomy status in August 2019 presented a number of new challenges to Kashmiri journalists who battled a communications blackout when authorities shut down the internet. 4G access was not fully restored until February 2021. At the time, this was the longest internet shutdown in world history, only to be surpassed by Myanmar. This year alone, authorities have shut down the internet in Kashmir at least 22 times, according to the digital blackout monitoring site internetshutdown.in. Since August 2019, legal harassment, physical attacks, threats, raids on journalists' homes, and even those of their family members have become the new norm. Local media has come under immense pressure due to a stringent media policy that essentially empowers authorities to accredit news outlets and journalists and to determine what constitutes fake news. Authorities have also put the local media under immense pressure by suspending government-funded advertising to local newspapers, a major source of their revenue. Online archives of local newspapers are also disappearing, and what one journalist told me is an erasure of memory. I would now like to pivot to the deeply disturbing attacks on press freedom that we have seen this year, which was marked by the forced shutdown of the Kashmir Press Club in January. The Kashmir Press Club is the largest elected trade body representing journalists in the region. It used to be a safe space for journalists to gather and share ideas, but unfortunately its coerced shutdown is just one of the disturbing attacks on the press that we have seen this year. In the past several months, since October 2021, we have seen that at least 4 more individuals have been detained in retaliation for their journalistic work. Their names are first Manandar, a freelance photojournalist arrested under the UAPA in October 2021. Second is Sajjad Gul, who was arrested in January in a criminal conspiracy case for simply tweeting a video of a protest. The third is Fahad Shah, who was first arrested in February under sedition in the UAPA for an article in the Kashmir Vala regarding a controversial gunfight in which armed government forces allegedly killed a teenage boy. This report included a quote from the family of this teenage boy who alleged that their son was not a hybrid militant as per the police's narrative. This report also included a statement from the police contradicting the family's claim. This was not enough. Fahad Shah has been rearrested 3 more times since his first arrest in dormant political cases going back years. The fourth journalist, or the fourth individual who has been arrested, is PhD scholar Abdul Allah Fazili, who was arrested earlier this week under the anti-terror UAPA for an article that he published in the Kashmir Vala in November 2011. An article that he published 10 years ago has now landed him in jail under India's draconian anti-terror law. I would also like to highlight the case of Asif Sultan, who was arrested under the UAPA in August 2018. He has languished in jail for almost 4 years. This case was marred by severe procedural delays and evidentiary irregularities, including the police's failure to produce a forensic report of his laptop and phone seized during his arrest, where the police claimed to have found incriminating evidence. Perhaps the most disturbing development that we have seen coming out of Kashmir these last few months is the use of the Public Safety Act, a draconian preventive detention law, against 3 journalists. The PSA, which Amnesty International once termed a lawless law, essentially allows for preventive detention for up to 2 years on very vague provisions concerning national security and public order. 3 journalists, Sajjad Gul, Fahad Shah, and Asif Sultan, were granted bail by local courts and were supposed to be released on bail. Instead, authorities deployed the use of the Public Safety Act against these journalists and rearrested them, and they were never reunited with their families and released. This is clear abuse of the legal process and a diversion of what the courts have ruled. The arguments presented in the government's dossiers are particularly disturbing in these 3 cases. Authorities argued that extending Gul's detention was necessary because he would otherwise be released on court-ordered bail. If you were to look at the orders deployed against Shah and Sultan, they are nearly identical. They both accuse the journalists of holding a radical ideology since childhood, circulating fake news, and working against the ethics of journalism. Moreover, although the police has repeatedly asserted that Asif Sultan was not arrested in retaliation for his journalistic work, in fact, they tweeted this in response to CPJ's advertisement in the Washington Post in August 2020 calling for Sultan's release, the Public Safety Act order against Asif Sultan specifically cites the cover story that he wrote for the Kashmir Narrator in the month prior to his arrest. The recent spike of arrests have left Kashmir's media at a breaking point. Dozens of journalists have fled the valley. Many are self-censoring and writing without bylines. Many are looking to travel abroad where they hope that they can freely continue their work or their studies. For many of these journalists, traveling abroad is not even an option. In September 2021, The Wire reported that around 22 Kashmiri journalists appear on a government no-fly list. This is in line with the accounts of numerous Kashmiri journalists who have reported significant difficulties in traveling abroad, particularly to attend event panels and award functions. I would like to close out my remarks for today by offering some recommendations to the US Congress. The US government has a unique relationship with India and the ability to hold the Indian government accountable for their press freedom violations according to India's constitutional commitments and its commitments under international law. I urge Congress to continue holding hearings on the human rights situation in India and Jammu and Kashmir to further educate US policymakers, to introduce a fresh resolution making clear that Congress supports freedom of expression and press freedom in India and Jammu and Kashmir, and condemns these ongoing violations, particularly the use of draconian anti-terror and preventive detention laws against these journalists. And finally, to inquire to the State Department about their human rights strategy on India, and to urge them to continue raising cases of journalists who have been detained in retaliation for their work. Thank you.